everyone, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040 and welcome to another edition of the Flash Season 8 review series. And today I am going to be talking about Episode 6, Impulsive Excessive Disorder, which I have just finished watching. And this episode was okay, it was enjoyable, but I can't help but feel that this story was more or less a rehash of something that we have seen before. You know, it just felt like this was just a recycled storyline, but with two different characters. Because this episode involved not only time travel, but it involved fixing the timeline. And not to be horrible, we've kind of seen quite a lot of that in this show. And we got to see it yet again. And Barry Allen wasn't really in much of this episode. He appeared at the beginning and a little bit at the end, and there was little scene in the middle, which I'll get into in a moment. But Barry Allen was largely absent. The two main characters in this episode was his kids, Nora and Bart Allen, better known as Excess and Impulse, and it just kind of felt a little bit silly. I mean, it was still a decent episode. I enjoyed watching it, but at the same time, it just kind of felt a little bit silly. I mean, after just coming off a 5-part epic, which was Armageddon, which, by the way, was absolutely fantastic, I was hoping for a nice follow-up to that stuff, but we didn't get that in this episode. I'm not saying that this episode was terrible. It was okay, but it just wasn't as strong as the 5-part Armageddon special because, as I said, I thought that was just absolutely fantastic. However, this episode did have a couple of surprises. One big one in particular. This episode saw the return of Eddie Thawne, and this was the first time that we have seen him officially since Season 1? I know he cameoed in one season, I believe that was Season 3, but he was only in for like, what, one scene? This was the first time that Eddie Thawne had a much bigger role. Maybe not as big as what he had in Season 1, but he still had a role nonetheless. And it was great to see him back. And I forgot how much I've missed Eddie Thawne on the show because he got killed off at the end of Season 1, you know. And he hasn't been seen ever since. There have been no attempts to try and bring him back. He hasn't come back as another doppelganger or from the multiverse. We haven't seen anything of Eddie Thawne. He might have been mentioned here and there, but, you know, he's just been largely absent. So to actually have him back in an episode was just fantastic. It was great to see him back. And, you know, hopefully we'll get to see more of him. So I'm going to give a quick recap of what's happened, and then we're going to get straight into talking about Episode 6. So basically what's happened is, at the end of Armageddon Part 5, there was a photograph of the Central City Police Force, and we saw Nora and Bart appear in the photograph. And the question that was asked at the end of Part 5 of Armageddon was, how did Nora and Bart Allen end up in the picture? So this episode, even though it does pick up from the end of Armageddon Part 5, this episode pretty much explains what exactly has happened. How did they end up in the picture? And also, you know, they messed up the timeline in typical Flash fashion. So as I said, this episode, although very enjoyable and it was fun, it just kind of felt like something we've seen before. But anyway, let's get straight into it. Let's talk about Episode 6, Impulsive Excessive Disorder. So this episode picks up where we left off from the end of season 7 with the wedding vow renewal of Barry and Iris, as we see Bart and Nora return to 2049 and they are promised to keep the future safe. Shortly after they arrive home, there is a temporal wave and they notice some changes. The biggest change that Joe Garrick is alive and well and he shows up with dinner. They do a little questioning and realise that there are other changes that have been made as well, namely that Jay isn't married to Joan, he's instead married to a woman named Rose, and they quickly go to the Flash Museum and they check the timeline for more issues and discover big problems that go back to December 31st, 2013 on New Year's Eve, when Joe West is shot during a robbery. So Nora and Bart Allen decide to race back to 2013 to try and save the timeline. We've heard this one before. Back in 2013, we see Joe is nervous about asking Cecile out, and she shoots him down when he tries to. Bart and Nora try to keep a low profile, but almost immediately run into Eddie Fawn, who wants to know why they're there. They cover themselves by claiming that they're intern CSIs helping while Barry is in a coma. Eddie sends them to fetch coffee, and while in line to get coffee, they encounter a young woman studying temporal dynamics. Her name is Avery, and she works for Fast Track Labs, where she's an unappreciated intern. Alerted that the robbery is underway, Bart and Nora head there. Joe and Eddie are already on the scene, and Joe confronts the rather bumbling thief, who he drops the gun, and Joe is about to be shot, and frantic to prevent the shooting, Bart speeds in without thinking and shifts Joe out of the way and saving him from the bullet, but what they don't realise is they've caused yet another issue in the process. The messed up timeline is getting worse as the woman who becomes the future queen of the Royal Flash Gang is nearby and hears them talking and realizing for the first time that she is not actually alone with her powers. Since they can't travel back in time to fix things without there being more issues, Bart and Nora decide to try to get the surveillance footage from the incident so they can figure out how to fix things. Elsewhere, the Queen, whose real name is Mona Taylor, has assembled a team of criminals with powers to try and carry out a heist at the Utopia casino, and that is where we officially see the formation of the Royal Flash Gang. Back at the CCPD, Nora swipes the surveillance footage and gives Joe some advice about Cecile, and the footage shows then Mona is at the crime scene, and when Nora checks the timeline, they find out about the casino heist, and with lives on the line, they must stop the heist, but Bart is already having a meltdown and blames himself for the events that have been caused and races off. We then see Nora finds him at Barry's bedside and gives him a pep talk. They then go to see Avery for help, and after convincing her that they really are from the future, she works with them, and when Nora realizes that the death toll of the casino robbery keeps changing, Avery explains that because the robbery itself is a fixed point, it must happen, but they can prevent the deaths and fix the timeline. Bart and Nora go to the casino and the heist begins. Nora starts looking for bombs placed at the casino while Bart tries to speed people off to safety. The Royal Flush Gang notices Bart's efforts and the heist must play out now, saving everyone falls to Nora finding the bombs. With just seconds remaining, Nora starts to panic, but Bart gives her a pep talk and she's successful. The heist goes off, but everybody is safe. At the CCPD, Eddie dismisses reports of people being streaked to safety, and Iris meets Eddie for the first time. I was just reminded in that scene how good Iris West was in the earlier seasons. She still looks great now, but there was just something about her. She looked absolutely amazing in those early seasons, and it was nice to see that. It was just like a little throwback to season 1, seeing Eddie and Iris meet each other for the first time. She looked really good. Cecile apologizes to Joe and gives him hope that they might be able to date in the future. And then we see everybody gets together to have their picture taken, and this is where Bart and Nora end up in the police force picture, and that's how they actually appeared. The day is saved. Bart and Nora go back to see Avery at Fast Track, where Bart and Avery have a romantic moment, and Bart promises he'll see her again. Back in 2049, Bart and Nora confess to Jay Garrick what went down, and Jay reassures Bart that even if he made mistakes with time travel, he'll always be the Flash, and he couldn't be more proud of him. Back in the present, Team Flash gets together to head off to Paris for a New Year's meal, and after they leave, Iris's hairbrush disappears in a temporal wave. And that's how we end episode 6. And that wraps up my review. As I said, overall, this episode was enjoyable, but at the same time, it just kind of felt like the storyline has been recycled yet again. You know, speedsters messing up the timeline and trying to fix it. In fact, I seem to recall Nora doing something similar to this, I think back in season 6 or 5 or something like that. So, you know, they keep recycling these storylines and just gets a bit old. But as I said, this episode was still enjoyable, but at the same time, it just felt like something we've seen before. But I would probably say the highlight of this episode was definitely seeing Eddie Thawne back, and hopefully, fingers crossed, that they could be setting up Eddie Thawne to become Cobalt Blue, because I think that would be incredible. And there were nice little callbacks to season 1 of The Flash, and even though they haven't confirmed that, you know, Flash is going to wrap up, this did kind of feel like, in some ways, the final season, because there were like little callbacks, as I said, to earlier seasons, you know, which I thought was pretty cool. But as I said, this episode, compared to the Armageddon 5-part special, this did feel a little bit weak and at times a little bit silly. But as I said, it was cool to see Eddie Thawne back, so we'll just have to wait and see what happens, really. So that's going to be it for me. I am going to wrap this up now. What was your thoughts on episode 6? Did you enjoy it? How did you feel about seeing Eddie Thawne again? Do you think they could be setting up for him to become Cobalt Blue at some point in the season? And also, what about the ending with the hairbrush disappearing due to the temporal wave? Could this be the start of something big? You know, what repercussions could there be with the whole timeline being messed around a lot? And also, what was your thoughts on the lack of Barry Allen in this episode? Do you think he should have been part of this episode? And also, what was your thoughts on the role that Nora and Bart Allen played in this one? Did you enjoy that as well? You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Flash Season 8 review series, where I am going to be talking about Episode 7, which hopefully is going to be a lot better than this one, so fingers crossed for that. So until next time, take care everybody and stay safe, and once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.